you very much for coming along to this morning's event on General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, or if someone's trying to scare you and they want to take a grammatical high horse, they say the GDPR. My name's Jake Brown, and I'm a business growth enabler in NatWest Business Banking, and I'm your host for today. I thought I'd start off by just saying why NatWest is sponsoring an event on GDPR. So NatWest is a bank, we sell financial services, so what's that got to do with GDPR? So I'll give a little bit of a corporate tagline to it to start off with. So our vision as a bank is to be number one for customer service, trust and advocacy. And we're going to do that by being more than just a provider of financial services. So what does that mean? What does that entail? That entails our business boost proposition. So that's boosting knowledge, boosting skills and boosting connections. So it's my role as a business growth enabler to do them three things. So I'll just explain what that means. So boosting connections, connecting people in the local community. The example I always give is an architect and an interior designer. Hey, we can't recommend anybody, but it could be worthwhile you two getting a coffee. Neither of them businesses banked with us when I made that introduction, and they both passed business since. Boosting skills, so that's providing advice, support, guidance, mentorship to small businesses. An example that I use there is helping a small business that banked with Barclays through their business plan. Later they actually switched to ourselves, but that wasn't the primary objective of the agenda. And the final one, boosting knowledge, running events on cybercrime, making tax digital, importing, exporting, or even the GDPR. So that leads me nicely on to today's event and what we've got in store. So we've got two presentations, one from Tim Paulding and one from Darren Cooley. They're going to take about 45 minutes and take us to approximately 10 o'clock. We'll then have a short break and then we'll do a Q&A session. So you should on your tables have a question sheet. So don't heckle please during the presentations, but write down any questions that you have during the presentations. If you've got terrible handwriting, please let somebody else write them for you. And in the short break, we'll collect in the questions and then I'll do the bullying after the break. We have got some questions submitted already, so it won't be too awkward if if the presentations are that good and you haven't got any questions. And final point, sometimes I go to events and people say, phones off, phones silent, don't use your phones, they're not allowed, or the phone police will get hold of you. What we'll say today is please put them on silent, but if you want to take photos, tweet about the event, tell your friends how great NatWest are, then fantastic, please do. That's not that funny, they're great. So brilliant, without further ado, I'll just read Tim's bio and we'll get stuck into the content. So Tim Paulding heads up the commercial department at Oliver & Co. Corporate and commercial solicitors, and has 30 years experience of advising own and managed and SME-sized businesses on the commercial and regulatory aspects of their contractual frameworks with customers, suppliers, introducers and employees. What a mouthful. Tim places great emphasis on working in partnerships with his clients, protecting them and enabling them to grow their business. Whilst others dream of GDPR, it excites Tim more so. Tim, over to you.
Right, good morning ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much Jake for that kind introduction. Okay, so you've heard a little bit about me. I'm Tim Paulding, I'm head of the commercial department at Oliver & Co, firm of solicitors based here in Chester city centre, and I'm going to talk to you today about whether or not you're ready to face GDPR with just 10 days to go until it is fully implemented. Who's fed up of hearing about GDPR already? Yeah. Pretty much. I'm afraid you're going to hear a little bit more from me this morning, and it will be all over the media in the months to come. Quick recap. Friday the 25th of May is the first day of a new era for data protection, according to Elizabeth Denham, who's the Information Commissioner. GDPR comes into effect on that date and creates a new framework designed to harmonise and modernise the law relating to data protection across Europe. We held another of these seminars 6 months ago here at the racecourse, and we talked to you then about the areas that the new framework would cover and how you would have to go about preparing to meet your new obligations, particularly in terms of identifying the correct basis for processing of personal data to be both fair and lawful. There was still a great deal of uncertainty at that stage about what information would have to be provided by a business to its customers its suppliers and its employees, or by other organisations to their members or beneficiaries, or indeed to the general public. And there's still some way to go, as the ICO itself admits, but they have made some significant progress over the last 6 months, and very detailed guidance is regularly being made available now on a variety of issues and across a range of sectors. A quick glance at the ICO website will tell you that they've now issued bespoke guidance to small organisations and micro businesses, retailers, hospitality businesses, financial service providers, charities, schools, health organisations, and even local government. Anyone monitoring the development of that website over the last 6 months will also have noticed that at least as much time and effort has been devoted to those sections of the site that relate to explaining the new rights of individuals who may have concerns about how their personal information is being used, as has been dedicated towards helping businesses and other organisations understand their new obligations and responsibilities. Awareness will only be raised further by the Your Data Matters campaign, which is due to launch a week on Friday and is designed to build up public trust and confidence in how data is used and looked after, while at the same time highlighting the recourse available to individuals where data breaches occur and organisations are found to be non-compliant. Claims management companies are already much in evidence, chomping at the bit to promote their services to the public and keen to establish a market for litigation along the same lines as PPI claims. So, what do we mean by compliance with the GDPR? There's essentially 3 elements. The first is organisational. So by now, you should have identified what personal data is kept or held and how it is stored or transmitted or used. You should have documented how and why personal data is being captured and used. You should have assessed the risk of a breach happening to that personal data. And you should have ensured that the right procedures are in place to detect and report and investigate a breach. So the security element of compliance, I'm not going to talk about this morning. It's not my bag. It's very much Darren and Joe's bag at Protos Networks, particularly around IT security. But don't overlook the element of physical security, which comprises both restricting access to your building or to certain areas of it, and also ensuring that personal information in a physical form which leaves your building is properly protected. The third element of compliance is where we come in. This is the legal side of things, and you should at least have started by now reviewing your legal frameworks, which for the most part will stem from the contractual relationships that you have. Have you done everything you can to ensure that not just your organisation, but those other businesses with which you deal, or individuals that will be responsible for handling data, are complying with their obligations under the new regime? This is the only way to minimise your potential liability in the event of a breach. In terms of legal frameworks, well, who do you have these with? Firstly, you have a contractual relationship with your staff. It should be governed by a contract of employment or a written statement of their main terms and conditions, and this is often accompanied by a staff handbook containing a variety of policies and procedures that they must abide by. Secondly, and thirdly, you have a contractual relationship with your customers and suppliers. These can be created verbally, either in person or over the telephone, but ideally they should always be committed to writing. Even more so now that you need to establish each party's responsibility for how any personal information that is necessary for the performance of that contract is collected, stored and used. Third parties, well, by their very nature, a third party relationship is one where you don't have a direct contractual relationship with that individual or organisation. They come in many forms, from visitors to your website, or attendees at a seminar, or a networking event, as we are today, or sub-processors used by one of your suppliers, or being another supplier to one of your customers or clients. So we'll look at each of those in turn, and in terms of the relationship with your employees, what do you need to have in place? Well, firstly, you should have a data privacy notice. This document describes how you as an employer collect and use an employee's personal information during and after their working relationship with you. It can also cover workers and contractors who may not come under the definition of an employee. And I've even been asked to produce a data privacy notice recently for a business to issue to its candidates as part of the recruitment process. Next, with your staff, you need to have an information security policy. This is a key document which helps you as an employer create a management framework setting out the requirements and responsibilities for maintaining the security of information within your business or organisation. Again, it's a document for internal use, but is one which customers in particular may ask to see as evidence that you run a tight ship. The privacy standard, which is an internal and external document, so for use with both your staff and your customers, it's formally known as the Data Protection Policy, and it sets out how your business seeks to protect personal data and to ensure that the staff are fully aware of the rules which govern their use of that personal data that they have access to during the course of their work. Finally, with employees, what we found clients like to have is a do's and don'ts summary. There's a great deal of detailed information in the other documents for staff to take in at first, and so this is a useful one-page summary for employees, identifying both new processes which are being introduced and good habits that they need to get into straight away. Moving on to customers and suppliers, what type of contracts are we talking about? Well, we have contracts for the sale of goods, which can be in the guise of long-term supply agreements or distribution agreements for some larger organisations, or alternatively a series of one-off individual contracts with customers. Similarly, with contracts for the supply of services, again, they can be long-term supply or service level agreements, or a series of individual contracts with customers or clients. And in this instance, the type of relationship we're talking about would also encompass consultancy agreements for individuals or contractors and acting in a self-employed capacity, or agency relationships. Charities that are entering into fundraising agreements with other organisations should also consider adopting a new form of contract that incorporates provisions relating to GDPR compliance. For smaller businesses, it's more common perhaps to use a combination of sales quotations, purchase orders, and order confirmations when supplying either goods and materials or services, or a combination of the two. And those sales quotations, purchase orders and order confirmations usually have a set of standard terms and conditions referred to in the form and then printed on the reverse. It's those terms and conditions with customers and suppliers that need to be updated to protect the business following the implementation of GDPR. Okay, so what are the documents then that you need to create or update? First of all, the data processing clauses that should appear in your main contract with your customers or suppliers. Hopefully you are just updating those, and there should be something in there already, but in some instances you will still find contracts that don't refer to any data protection regime at all, let alone the new one that comes in a week on Friday. Usually in the relationship, the customer is the data controller and the supplier is a data processor, but there are relationships where both parties are deemed to be a data controller with joint responsibility for the purpose, conditions and means by which personal information is processed. The clauses in your contract should address a number of things, and I'll run through them quickly. Firstly, permitted processing, and this is often linked to a schedule in the document, setting out the scope, nature, purpose, duration, type and categories of data subject. The data processing clauses should also cover security measures that the parties are required to adopt, confidentiality obligations, any restrictions on transfers outside the European Economic Area, and we'll come to that later in the Q&A because I know there's at least one question dealing with that issue. The clauses should also deal with assistance with data subject access requests by the other or to the other party, breach notifications, how they're dealt with in terms of notifying the customer, the ICO and the data subject. The deletion and return of personal data needs to be covered, as do records and audits. Is there going to be a bar or a restriction placed on sub-processors being used? And finally, you need to make provision for any variation or updating to those clauses in the future if the arrangements change. As I said, some contracts already have a reference to data protection in them. For the most part, what I see on a day-to-day basis, that extends to 2 or 3 lines and isn't GDPR compliant. The average one we're doing for clients at the moment in terms of something to slot into their contracts is about a page and a half. So you can see there's quite a lot more information that needs to be provided there than most businesses and organisations currently make available. Moving on to the privacy standard, this is what's traditionally been known as a data protection policy. I've already referred to it when looking at the relationship you have with your employees, but it is important for external use as well and sets out how your business seeks to protect personal data. Those of you who operate websites, which virtually every organisation does these days, will need a website privacy policy. This is the equivalent of the data privacy notice that you have with your employees, in that it discloses the basis on which you as an organisation gather, use and store personal information from customers, clients and other parties with whom you interact when they visit your website. Again, very quickly, the type of thing that needs to be covered in there is the purpose of the document, the identity of the data controller, which is invariably you, setting out your full contact details, the mechanism for updating the policy and any personal information that's collected by you, details of any third-party links from your website, the type of data that you collect, how that data is collected, how the data is used, and this is important. It needs to be divided into the main purposes and the ancillary purposes for which the data may be collected. And there should be reference to the lawful basis that you are relying on for processing that data. The best ones I've come across set this out in a table form as part of their website policy, but they're very detailed. Specific provisions relating to marketing, particularly if you need to rely on consent as the lawful basis for some elements of the processing that you're doing, who the data is disclosed to, how the data is kept secure, how long the data will be retained and how it will be deleted when it's no longer required. And finally, the key rights of the data subject in relation to the information that is being provided by them. So quite a lot of information to be contained there. Third parties, well, what happens where there's no contractual relationship? It's extremely important that your policies and procedures address this situation where personal information may be received by a third party and processed by you, say an inquiry from a prospective customer or client that never actually becomes a customer or client and therefore never enters into a contract with you. Equally, if you receive a request from a third party for personal information in respect of a data subject, you need to cover off how that information will be treated and what you are allowed to do with it. So occasionally, for example, we will get an inquiry from another supplier to a mutual client of ours. It may be a request for ID information, certified copies of passports, things of that nature. Well, we need to be absolutely sure that we have got the permission of the client to use that information in that way before we simply pass it on to a third party. Will the recipient of personal information be a data processor or a data controller? Well, it's important to establish this because it determines the obligations and the level of responsibility that's attributable to the third-party recipient. If you've got no opportunity to set the parameters for the purposes, conditions and means by which the third party processes that data, then the chances are that the third party will also become a data controller with a higher degree of responsibility for what happens to that information after it comes into their possession. I think the important thing though, whether there's a contractual relationship or not, or whether your policies and procedures are adequate in addressing every eventuality, GDPR places the overall responsibility for looking after an individual's personal information firmly with each business or organisation and its staff that is afforded access to that data. With that in mind, I'd like to spend the last few minutes of my presentation talking about the importance of culture and training by highlighting a few recent examples from the current regime. First of all, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. Who thinks they're a dab hand with spreadsheets? My hand would not be going up at this point. I'm very much a rookie and a novice when it comes to operating Excel spreadsheets, but this is a salutary tale for those who are not as familiar as perhaps they'd like to be with the workings of spreadsheets, and an even more salutary tale for those that employ them. Following the tragic fire at Grenfell Tower, journalists made a Freedom of Information Act request to the borough for the disclosure of standard statistical information which had been used in a report back in 2015 concerning the number of empty properties in the borough. The information was no longer held by the council, so a member of their Revenue Systems Administration team produced a table containing the information, which was then copied and pasted into a new Excel spreadsheet and sent to the Freedom of Information team. This spreadsheet contained hidden information including 943 names of those who owned the empty properties. But that wasn't spotted, and the spreadsheet was disclosed in compliance with the FOI request. The relevant newspapers who'd asked for the information then published the names of 3 very high-profile individuals who owned empty properties in the borough, and additionally, a data analyst published the whole spreadsheet on an online blog. An investigation by the ICO found that the council had failed to take appropriate organisational measures against unauthorised processing of that personal data, since the FOI team had not been trained on the functionality of Excel spreadsheets and had not been trained to check for information hidden within. The council were fined £120,000 because they ought reasonably to have been aware that they needed, as far as possible, to ensure that the correct information was disclosed to the applicants in response to the FOI request. Humberside Police didn't fare any better in their dealings with the ICO after discs containing a video interview of an alleged rape victim went missing. 3 unencrypted discs and accompanying paperwork were left in an envelope on an officer's desk. The bundle contained the victim's name, date of birth and signature, as well as details about the alleged rape itself, the victim's mental health, the suspect's name and address. Pretty much a full house of sensitive information there. The envelope was due to be posted to Cleveland Police, but it never arrived, and it's not known whether the package was in fact ever sent. The ICO investigation found Humberside Police failed to encrypt the discs before sending, or intending to send, them by unsecure mail. They also failed to maintain a detailed audit trail of the package. And the Protecting Vulnerable People unit within Humberside Police failed to adhere to its own information security policy. You'll remember that's the one that we issue to employees so that they understand how they're supposed to look after the information. So the outcome was a £130,000 fine and a signed commitment from Humberside Police to improve their data protection practices. One now for those of you involved in marketing. July 2017, Royal Mail sent a total of 327,014 emails outlining a price drop in the cost of sending parcels to people who had opted out of their direct marketing. The company tried to argue that the emails constituted a service message, but the ICO disagreed and found them to be marketing emails. As the Royal Mail didn't have the recipient's consent to the receipt of the emails, the sending of them constituted a breach of the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulations 2003. The ICO fined Royal Mail £12,000 in respect of that breach. And finally, it's not just the possibility of 5- and 6-figure fines from the ICO which you need to be concerned about. A data breach may also lead to individuals who are increasingly aware of their data rights, bringing claims for damages. Such claims can be for the distress that's caused by the breach, even where no monetary loss has been caused. In this instance, which is the first group litigation data breach claim, there were 5,500 employees who joined together in an action against Morrisons after a disgruntled senior IT auditor deliberately posted a file containing personal information about 100,000 employees on a file sharing website. The data comprised their names, addresses, gender, dates of birth, phone numbers, national insurance numbers, salary information and bank details. The auditor, whose motivation stemmed from a grudge against Morrisons, ended up with an 8-year prison sentence. However, in addition to the damage that was caused to the supermarket's reputation, the court decided that Morrisons should also be liable for the actions of its employee, who'd been carrying out his normal duties as an IT auditor, albeit in a malicious way. There are concerns about that decision, and the judge, even himself at the time, was concerned enough to grant immediate leave to appeal to Morrisons, which they duly did. And the Court of Appeal is now going to consider the arguments in relation to that case in October of this year. But for now, there's the very real prospect that businesses and other organisations with employees who may be held responsible for the acts of their staff, not just in terms of regulation by the ICO, but also in the eyes of the victims of any data breach. Right, nearly at the end. There's clearly many lessons to be learned from those high-profile cases, and a warning for businesses and other organisations, both large and small, as to the sanctions that can be imposed for failing to look after personal information. But it's not all doom and gloom. For those that can demonstrate they are compliant and have earned the trust of both their customers and the wider public, this change in the law does give them an opportunity and a competitive edge over those organisations that can't. As the Information Commissioner Elizabeth Denham is at pains to point out, this is a process of evolution rather than revolution. It's not too late to address the issues that we've covered this morning. The ICO certainly won't be ready with its full resource behind it to start investigating every organisation that processes personal data by a week on Friday. Its focus over the first few months will be more on ensuring that awareness levels of the public are significantly increased. This is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing in that it gives businesses and other organisations a little more leeway in terms of making sure that they're compliant. But rest assured, it won't be too long before the effects of that campaign will be felt by the private sector, the public sector and the not-for-profit sector. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Tim. I think the culture and training slide shows just how important it is to get it right. Thanks for the info on them key areas. I think that the website privacy policy one is a key example. If you sat there with a website that doesn't have one, you think, I've got something to do now. And if not, you've got the peace of mind. And I think that's true of most of the things that you've said there. You've either got peace of mind that you're compliant, or you've got something to do. And I haven't seen too many people scribbling away, so I think that everyone in the room is compliant. Now on to Darren Cooley, who is a technical director at Protos Networks. He's co-founder of Protos Networks. He's based here in Chester. Darren is a networks and cybersecurity specialist, and since leaving the British Army in 2006, has provided technical and consultancy services for a wide range of organisations, including the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Thales Defence, Verizon, Warner Brothers, Money Supermarket and Unilever. So Darren fought in the forces, now he fights fraudsters.
Last time we held an event like this, I spoke pretty much about the policies and the processes and the organisational controls that businesses can put in place to protect their data. Things like the information security policy, which Tim mentioned. Today I'm going to go into the more technical elements, you know, the day-to-day stuff of what our organisation does. Information security and cyber security. And the reason I'm saying this, I'm going to quote the Information Commissioner herself again, Elizabeth Denham. She said in a briefing to the CBI recently that data protection and cyber security are inextricably linked, and they are. Most of the data we hold in this day and age is probably on a server or in the cloud or on a mobile device or wherever it may be. That's not to say we don't neglect our physical security, and we will talk about that towards the end. But like last time, I'm going to show you a little snippet of the GDPR, Article 32, and this is very apt in what we do. Now don't worry, I'm not going to start reading articles of European law here. But there's a few terms that jump out here. And this article is really about future-proofing data protection and information security laws for technologies which may be coming down the road in 10 years' time. Could be holograms, could be time travel, who knows? You know, we might still need to protect our data even then. So taking into account the state of the art, so that could be now with the cloud or mobile devices, or it could be in 10 years' time. Controls and processes need to implement the appropriate technical and organisational measures to ensure a level of security appropriate to the risk. And I'll move on to risk in my next slide. But risk should be at the centre of everything you do. You know, do you implement a certain technology? If you're a one-man band with a couple of hundred data records, maybe not. Maybe you just need some antivirus, a little bit of a review of your PCs. Encryption there is mentioned. Tim's already mentioned encryption and homicide police, and we've got a slide on that. Encryption is going to be very important, ensuring our data is encrypted when it's moving and when we store it. And we need to ensure the confidentiality, integrity and availability of data, CIA. Now if you've ever been to a cybersecurity or a data protection briefing before, you probably would have heard that. CIA, confidentiality, people can't get into our data and steal it or view it if we don't want them to. The integrity, so is the data right? Can people reach into your systems and change things? Alternatively, could you be sending the wrong data to the wrong people? And then the availability of your data. So is that data on hand? And this becomes more apt with regards to GDPR when we're talking about charities, vulnerable children maybe. If you lose their data, that data subject is at risk. Also financial data. You know, if you don't have that data, that's a breach and you have to report that. We also look at the ability to restore data, so making sure you have backups off-site, backups in the cloud, encrypted backup tapes that you take home, you know, not just from a data protection point of view, but also protecting your organisation. Think of your intellectual property, think of your customer databases. If you lost that, that could potentially put you out of business. And then at the bottom there, this article says you should implement a process for regularly testing, assessing and evaluating the effectiveness of your controls, and we've got a slide on that at the end. There's a number of options open for businesses, large and small, to test themselves and evaluate themselves on the controls they have in place. So enough of that. How do we implement this in real life, and what we advocate in, as a company to many of our customers at the moment? Any of you who came to the last event will recognise this diagram from that time. At the centre of everything, when we're protecting our systems or our data, is knowing what we have. You can't realistically protect your data until you know what you have. And some of the methods to employ when you're doing this could be a data asset register or a GDPR data mapping tool. So you could be mapping what the data asset is, what personal data is held within that, where you source the data, where it flows to, your lawful purpose for processing, and your retention periods around it. So once you know that, you can make a decision on that. Do we need to get rid of that data? Are we actually lawful in holding this data? Do we need to re-seek consent? Once you've mapped your data, you can then realistically put a risk assessment around it. And a risk assessment could be anything from the fire risk to some HR files in a filing cabinet in the corner, or the risk of a cyber attack on your £2 million data centre. Whatever it is, and whatever level your organisation is at, you should be doing a risk assessment, or data protection impact assessments, which are a vital part now of GDPR when you implement new bits of technology or new forms of processing. Then from that risk assessment, you can then go and put the appropriate controls in place. So Tim's already mentioned them this morning, the organisational controls that businesses and other organisations need to be putting in place. I mentioned them quite heavily in the last session that we had. But these are your people, your policies, your processes, employment contracts, privacy notices, things like that. They're all brilliant, you know, for letting your staff know what they can and can't do, letting your suppliers or your customers know their rights under the data protection regulation, also knowing what to do in a breach. But underpinning all of this should be technical controls. So if the worst does happen, if one of your users do click on a phishing link or download a bit of malware or take a file out the office, there should be technical controls which underpin this and stop breaches or cyber attacks or incidents happening. And I'm going to go a little bit more into these as we go through this next 15-20 minutes. So, as we mentioned then, knowing data flows. Where is your data flowing? So in this day and age, our data is flowing everywhere. And for security administrators, IT administrators, data protection professionals, and even MDs of companies, this can be a real headache for them. So, you just think now where potentially your data's going. So the first thing I'd say, who's got company data in their pocket right now? Most of you, I'd imagine. Emails on your phone at the very least. Mobile devices. So this is corporate data, and if you work in an industry such as Tim's, where it's very sensitive data, that's leaving your office on a daily basis. That's going on trains. It's coming to Chester races and potentially being left in in the corner when you fall asleep. Not saying you do that, Tim. But that's the risk to our data. You also have people on trains or in public, shoulder surfing, looking at your PIN, potentially stealing your phones. Big area of risk is mobile devices. Next one is email. We've all seen phishing emails. We've all seen spoofed emails and know what they look like. 68% of malware and cyber attacks originating from malware is sent over email. It's enormous and it's a huge risk to your organisation. Websites is another one. The back end of websites is where we might store customer databases, cloud, whatever it may be. Need to be thinking about our website security as well when we think about data storage and data flows. Then we look at our internal databases, our internal servers. Some companies may have their own bespoke applications that they may use for their own CRM system, or we're working with one client at the minute who's got their own bespoke ordering system which is based in the United States, and we're analysing the security around that. Also, you might use a hosting company such as UKFast in Manchester, somewhere like that. Are you doing your due diligence on them that they're securing your data? And then the big shiny cloud. We've all heard of the cloud, sounds all amazing and mysterious, but all the cloud is one big network. Essentially, it's a server stored in a data center of a cloud provider. But, and I know in our company, we're almost totally cloud-based. We don't host any of our own data in our office around the corner there. And just think of the cloud applications that we might use day in, day out. So, Dropbox for sharing files with our clients. Office 365 for your emails, or for your SharePoint maybe if you use that. CRM systems such as Salesforce. Google Cloud, G Suite, we've got plenty of customers who may use that. And our accounting packages, Xero, we've got client data and supplier data going into that. So as we can see, the cloud is a massive area of concern when we're talking about data protection as well. And you should be doing your due diligence on cloud environments and hosted environments. And Tim already mentioned a moment ago international transfers of data, and that's what this slide covers. Now, under the GDPR, there are certain environments and certain third countries to where it is okay in the eyes of the European Union for you to transfer data. So, obviously, the first two up there, the European Union and the European Economic Area, so countries like Liechtenstein, Switzerland, testing myself now, Iceland, they're all identified as compliant and have stringent data protection laws in place. But there's also a very small handful of third countries, so Argentina, Canada, Israel, New Zealand and Uruguay apparently has got a very stringent data protection law, so if you want to store your data in Uruguay, go ahead there. But more important when we're talking about cloud applications and the big tech firms and storage, we think of the United States. Companies like Dropbox and Xero and these big providers, they're American-based companies and they still host a lot of your data in the United States. Now, for the purposes of GDPR, when we're transferring data over to the United States, your provider should be part of the EU-US Privacy Shield framework. In the old days, it used to be something called Safe Harbor, but since the US government likes to get into cloud environments and snoop on European citizens. The EU has highlighted that the EU-US Privacy Shield environment is the only thing that is compliant when you're transferring data to the United States. So I know companies like Dropbox and MailChimp, you know, these cloud providers that many of you in this room might use, do adhere to this framework. But we're also seeing a lot of the big tech giants moving their data centers to places like Ireland and Frankfurt and places like that, just in case the EU decides that they don't want to store data in America anymore. So, as well as when we're looking at the physical location of transfers of data, we also want to look at the certifications that our cloud providers might have. The first one up there is ISO 27001, or any of the ISO 27000s. These are information security standards, one of the most highly regarded in the world. Any cloud host or any hosting company worth their salt will have that certification. There's the AICPA SOC standard, another security and compliance standard, and then we have PCI, which is more around credit cards, the payment card industry's DSS standard. But that again shows that your providers adhere to a strong level of security, because the PCI standard is quite stringent. So there are your data flows, and that's where you should be looking at where your cloud providers are hosted. So we'll now go into some more technical controls that you could potentially put into place for when you're trying to protect your systems from an information security point of view. So the first thing, and it's been mentioned 3 or 4 times already this morning, is encrypting your data in transit and at rest. Now, most of your big cloud providers, such as Microsoft, Amazon Web Services, people like that, they will encrypt your traffic when it leaves your PC and it goes up to the cloud. You know, the little lock that you see when you're on a secure website, HTTPS, we used to call that SSL, it's now called TLS encryption. That's how that's done when you're sending it to a cloud provider, but you should always check. And the majority of these guys will encrypt your transit whilst it's stored on their servers at site. Always check that. But when we're talking about encryption as well, we should also include laptops. You know, to turn laptops on a Windows 10 Pro device is really easy. You know, it's a few clicks and then you have to wait a few hours while it encrypts. But that's something your IT administrators can do relatively easy. Mobile phones should be PIN protected and encrypted. And I've got a little bit more on mobile to come. And a big one and a huge risk for businesses is if you allow removable media and USBs, and if you're allowing your staff to take data in their pocket wherever they go, all those USB pens encrypted. We're finding more and more companies are just banning USBs altogether and using secure file shares and things like that. Again, encryption. If you've got a site here and a site in London, do you have what we know as VPN, a virtual private network, which is an encrypted tunnel, if you like, across the internet over to that other site to send data. But also when you're thinking about your staff as they travel, maybe going internationally or wherever they travel around the UK, do they have a VPN on their laptop so they connect back into your corporate office, especially to get data, you know, from any servers or anything you have on site. It's also quite handy if you're in Bulgaria and you need to watch EastEnders. You know, looks like you've got a UK IP address and you can get to the BBC iPlayer. Passwords are the bane of my life at the minute, because every client I go to, they don't listen to what I'm telling them, or they're written on a post-it note next to their PC. So strong, non-guessable passwords, ensure they're used. Now, the old way of thinking is going now, and new ways of dealing with passwords that are coming about, especially guidance from the National Cyber Security Centre. So, we used to say change your passwords often, but what we're finding is users get lazy. They end up writing it under their keyboard or using things like their dog's name and things like this. So what they're thinking is now from many organisations is use strong, long passwords, but don't change them regularly, because users get password fatigue. So, you know, potentially 3 random words with a few numbers in the middle. Non-guessable, things like password or FIDO1 if your dog's called FIDO. But passwords are breakable, and it's amazingly easy how easy it is to crack a password. So wherever you can, use 2-factor authentication. So that's, you know, when you get the 6-digit number sent to your phone, you can turn this on in most cloud apps. So things like Office 365, Google, Xero, if you use Xero for your accounts. This feature is available. Wherever it's available, you should be turning it on. it just mitigates that risk enormously. Off-site backups we've already mentioned. Can you restore that data, especially if you're holding data which, if lost, could put someone at risk under GDPR. Emails then we've already mentioned. Emails are the easiest way in for a criminal or an attacker to get into your systems and do damage or steal data. So are you using strong email security and spam filters? Is your email system scanning for malware as well as it comes in? And there's controls such as SPF and DMARC. I don't expect everyone in the room to understand what these are, but write them down and go and ask your IT administrator, are we doing this to avoid our email domains being spoofed? And then train your staff on what to look for in a phishing email. You know, we've all seen the dodgy phishing emails that say they're from the DVLA and the English is terrible and you can spot it a mile off. But these guys are getting cleverer and cleverer. And we're seeing some really smart phishing emails come in, purporting to be from the MD of the company, getting you to do a quick bank transfer or send some data somewhere, whatever it may be. We're seeing some really, really good ones now. So test your staff. There's phishing, we do phishing simulation for a number of organisations where we'll send fake emails in. They look really good. They could be from Amazon Prime or somewhere like that. They click on it and we go, I got you, and then we send them to do some training. It's good because it not only does it keep your staff on your toes, but when you do this regularly, they start looking out and they start talking about it between them. And that fits into what Tim said about a culture of awareness and security awareness within an organisation. Block malicious domains and websites, the whole host of technologies out there that can help you do that. And consider restricting printing. Now we're working with a number of schools at the minute, local primary schools, and printing is a big one for them because they might print sensitive student data about their health, you know, learning difficulties, whatever it may be. And printing is one where we've had to, you know, say to them, you need to look at this. You know, is it a card system for printing documents, or is it moving the printer into the deputy head's office, something like that. Something to consider. Consider upgrading to next generation firewalls. So, what do I mean by that? Most of the firewalls that you see out there could be built into a BT router, or it could be, I'm not having a go at Draytech, but it could be like a Draytech firewall, something like that. All they really are is a basic internet filter. So they'll block traffic coming in, and they'll allow traffic going out of your network. There is much, much better technology available now on the market. A next generation firewall will inspect all that traffic as it comes into your network. And depending on the device you can buy, it could be inspecting for known malware. It could be inspecting for known intrusion attempts, so someone trying to exploit a vulnerability on a server in your network. They can also do content filtering and VPN technology, so when your users want to connect back into the office. And you can implement a good, very good, industry-leading next-generation firewall for under £1,000. So it's not necessarily going to break the bank for most businesses. Again, I've mentioned intrusion prevention and detection systems there. These can sense what PCs, what operating systems you've got on your networks and what vulnerabilities might exist. And if they see someone from the outside trying to exploit that vulnerability, they can block it there and then. You know, and also when we get into breach reporting as part of the GDPR, an intrusion prevention system will tell you when attempted breaches occur. And doing that forensic examination of your data after, that could be a very important part of it. Segregating networks, especially guest networks. The amount of clients I go to, and I go onto their guest Wi-Fi, and I can see their server, and you can see their file shares, is amazing. That is a huge risk for your organisation, especially if your guest Wi-Fi network hasn't got a password or anything on it. You know, people can move freely around your network. Also think of the sensitive parts of your organisation. So it could be your legal and compliance team, or it could be your HR team. Are they in their own network, or do they use their own systems? Strong anti-malware technologies. This goes without saying, but not just your traditional antivirus or endpoint security, your Sophos, your ESET, things like this, but strong anti-malware technologies in your firewalls, and maybe at a cloud level this can be done as well. A whole host of technologies depending on your risk. Monitoring, logs and alert. Your IT providers should be doing this. If they're not, tell them to do it, or get a new one. And limit admin accounts. So, your day-to-day users should not have admin rights on their PCs. And the reason for this is they end up installing their own software, which creates vulnerabilities. But also, if they're using an admin level account for browsing the internet and getting to their emails, if they download malware, essentially the hacker then has admin rights onto your computer and they can do a lot more damage. So limit admin accounts, only have director level approval maybe for people who have that in your organisation. Change the default password on all devices, especially firewall devices. Goes without saying, the minute it comes out of the box, change that password. Does anyone know who Laurie Love was? He's an autistic chap who obsessed with aliens, and he was trying to hack the Pentagon and the US government and people like this. Laurie Love got all the way to a US nuclear submarine, parked in port, by using admin all the way through a US Department of Defense network. Astounding, isn't it? Just change the passwords, you know, cameras, whatever it may be. Mobile devices then, we've already mentioned this. Ensure that they can be remotely wiped and consider using a mobile device management solution. So things which can push apps out to your mobile devices. They can remotely wipe them, you know where your phones are, so if it's left on a train, you'll know, oh, my phone's in Manchester, and you can put up a splash page maybe saying, please return to our organisation. If you're a smaller organisation though, and you don't want to implement a mobile device management solution, things like iCloud can remotely wipe your device or remotely lock it and things like that. But when we're thinking about our mobile devices and business data going on, that's what we should think about with that. And on that, limit bring your own device activity. So if people are bringing in their own iPads or their own laptops, whatever it may be, only restrict them to what they need. You know, they could potentially be bringing malware or another vulnerability into your network. And then Office 365, got Office 365 users in here. Now, recently, Microsoft brought in a GDPR dashboard, which is quite helpful if you manage your own Office 365. And from here, you can do all kinds of things, such as create subject access requests. There's tools in there to protect your data, so tagging and things like that. And restrict the onward flow, so if someone tries to send some sensitive data outside of your domain, it'll block you or warn you. I know ours does when we share files with some of our clients, it'll tell me this person is outside your organisation, so there's a few steps I have to go through which warn me that I'm sharing data with potential people I shouldn't be. And you know, your Office 365 dashboard can also monitor activity reports and check your compliance state, not just with GDPR, but things like ISO 27001 or PCI and things like that. And then Tim's already mentioned this, so physical security, something we neglect all too often. You know, I know a guy who does intrusion testing for businesses. And he was doing it for a large high street brand, and they just spent a few million on their network security, new firewalls and things like this. And they said to him, come and try and hack us, try and breach us. So he walked into one of their offices in London, walked straight through the door, straight into the comms room, stole the server, walked out and went and put it on the head of security's desk. They totally neglected their physical security. Again, security of server rooms and storage areas. You know, not just where your servers are, maybe where your HR files and things are. CCTV, alarms, door access. Secure destruction of assets. You know, when you're getting rid of PCs, is your IT provider or your destruction company securely wiping them using software? Are they shredding or burning assets, whatever, if they're paper assets? Fire safety mechanisms, because remember the availability of our data. If your HR files catch fire or you store paper documentation, you could potentially breach yourself in a fire. Clear desk policies. We're seeing this more and more. We got one client to implement this the other day because the girls who work in their office there like to hoard data on their desk, let's say. It's quite sensitive data, so they've implemented that. At the end of the day, they lock all their paper away, or they shred it if they don't need it. Cooling for servers and other IT equipment, you know, things can overheat. Don't take the door off, you know, like we see some people do. Just opens up more security risk. Maybe implement air conditioning or something like that. Check-in and check-out processes for physical files. So if you have people maybe attending court or something like that, you know, and they're taking sensitive client folders with them, have you got a check-in and check-out process maybe? Or do you give them secure briefcases, something like that? Visitor and contractor access, a big one. You know, criminals now, cyber criminals, are resorting back to the old tactics of trying to blag their way into buildings. Are you checking who visitors are? Are you giving them different coloured lanyards? You know, are you escorting them when they're on site? Biometric systems for highly secure areas. Now, some of the companies I've worked for, biometric systems are used to get into data centres left, right and centre. It might not be an affordable option for businesses, but depending on your risk. Like everything I spoke about this morning, it all depends on your risk appetite as an organisation. You know, if you hold very sensitive healthcare data and you've got a bit of money to spend, you know, do you have an iris scanning software to get into your data centre, something like that. And then, my final slide, have I gone over it? No? Right, okay. My final slide then, testing and assessing your system. So, top on there, vulnerability scanning and assessment on your IT infrastructure. We're doing this a hell of a lot at the moment. I think I've done 4 in the last 3 days. And we're finding stuff that your IT providers may have missed. And this isn't that we're trying to get your IT providers or your IT administrators into trouble, but they miss stuff. You know, they might not have the in-house security skills that a company like ours may have. So running a vulnerability scan on your network might highlight areas of risks that you never thought were there, and that a hacker or any hacker worth their salt could exploit. As we mentioned there, ISO 27001, information security standard. If you've got 10 grand and a year of your life to spare, very comprehensive standard for protecting your data. Now that's not achievable for many SMEs or many smaller organisations. So that's why the IASB governance standard exists. And the IASB governance standard covers all the same areas as ISO 27001, but it's strictly tailored towards smaller organisations. That standard also includes GDPR readiness, and that is all I do these days, is those assessments day in, day out. PCI then, you know, if you have if you hold credit card details, you may have seen these PCI audits come through to your company. That is a very, very strong level of network security and anti-malware and anti-hacking protection. Penetration testing then, or ethical hacking as it's known. So, you know, where what we call a white hat hacker, a good guy, they're never white hat, they're usually grey hat. You know, they will try and exploit vulnerabilities in your systems, you know. And they can be very, very clever with what they do. The guy we use up in Glasgow, he's also in the Army's cybersecurity unit, he's captain in there. But he'll do really clever things, like he'll research your board of directors maybe on Facebook and LinkedIn and things like that. He might drop a USB in the car park with Bitcoins written on it, and then one of your staff will come in and plug it in, double click something and he's into your network there. You know, it's not just scanning and trying to exploit things. Also more and more with ethical hacking penetration testing, we're seeing people trying to blag their way into buildings, doing that kind of testing as well. So testing your staff on whether they're saying, are you a visitor, can I see you pass, things like that. And then at the bottom then, and the brochures in front of you from us, is all about cyber, the government Cyber Essentials scheme. We advocate this for businesses of all sizes. Government-backed scheme covers 5 essential areas, they think, of where a business can protect itself, up to 80% of common internet-borne cyber attacks. And you can self-assess Cyber Essentials for as little as £300. So that's pretty much it from me this morning on the technical controls. I hope that was informative. It was a little bit different to what we did last time. So I'll hand back to Jake. Thank you.
Again, I think it just shows the importance of having the controls in place, or having somebody like Darren to support your business.